Happy to welcome Andreas Traum from PWC again today. He will be giving a presentation on the hurdles and benefits of tokenized assets. Hi.
Thanks for that introduction. And I was supposed to be sharing the screen with my partner colleague, Konstantin Dagianis, today. He is living proof that although we might not want it to be, COVID is not gone. It's still here. So he's not feeling that well today and can't be with us today. So hurdles and benefits of tokenized assets. Speaking at 4 p.m. on day 2 has a disadvantage. And one is that I think you've been listening to a lot of presentations, and I'm not sure how much new stuff I can give you on that topic, even though we're starting a new chapter in the session. The benefit of speaking at 4 p.m. on day 2, however, is that I think looking at the agenda that we already had so far today and looking at the speakers, I don't need to establish that tokenized assets play already today an increasingly important role in today's financial ecosystem. I remember last year I was part of a panel which had the overarching question, is tokenization of everything possible? We came to the conclusion that we said, yes, in essence, and technically it is. Today on the slide I have one quote which is asking in German, can I soon tokenize my grandmother? And I think looking back at the discussion and everything that's happened in the time since, again, we can say, yes, you might have to argue with your grandmother whether or not you can consider her an asset. But once that's clarified, then you can move on to tokenizing her. If we have a look at some of the figures that, and this is a prognosis by the World Economic Forum, and apologies, of course, that has to read US dollar trillions, not billions. The World Economic Forum back in 2017 had an estimation that by 2022, we'd be looking at a total market cap of digital assets of $4 trillion US. Now, if we look at the real numbers, by end of last year, we did breach the 3 trillion mark. Then we had a bit of a dip. We're down. I think we're right now, it's changing day by day. We're looking at about 2.2 trillion US dollar. Now, well, that's a lot already in a new asset class, and I like the panel before where we said, that asset class is here to stay, and of course we agree. That only amounts to 2.5% of the world's global GDP combined. We look at how that is estimated to develop by 2027. We'll have well in excess of 20 trillion US dollars. Thus amounting to about 10% of global GDP, which will then be tokenized. And one of the benefits, as we go into this chapter today, of tokenization is the ability to significantly increase liquidity, which is within the trading ecosystems. Because by tokenizing, we tap into so far illiquid assets. We'll talk a little bit more about that today. But by tokenization, we can tap into collectibles, we can tap into intellectual property rights, and we can bring them, by tokenizing them, we can bring them into the trading ecosystem and thus significantly increase the volumes that we're talking about. Yesterday, we talked about decentralized finance a lot, and just a little, just to see where we are today, put up this slide, and with the tokenization of assets, we're somewhere in the middle, right? And Konstantin and I coined the phrase of hybrid chain finance, and I'm pretty sure that there's going to be lots of discussions whether or not that's an adequate term at all, but we don't really care. We just wanted to show we're not really in the extent of DeFi, but we're also not in traditional finance. We're somewhere in between. We are looking at elements of decentralized infrastructure. We're talking about tokenized assets, but primarily we're still talking about identified stakeholders, and we're not in the completely anonymous world. Taking a quick look at the types of tokens, and speaking on the crypto asset conference, probably at face value, most people would say, why is he talking about this at all? Because it should be known to most people. But we also use the slide a lot when talking to more legacy actors in the financial markets infrastructure. While at face value, some things might be clear, I think when we talk about what are some of the challenges and hurdles to larger extent adoption of tokenized assets within the financial infrastructures, the question is how are these today governed? What rules and regulations do we have, and how do they have to be treated? Because very often it's not the pure form or technical implementation that defines how they have to be treated and governed, but it's the actual usage of it. I think very clear utility token, we'll talk about that. We're not in the securities world, we're not within MiFID, but purely those are typically within a closed community, and it's a voucher for the purchase of a service within that closed community. Very early examples of that was development of gaming applications where you can finance the development of the gaming by buying a token, and then you can use that for in-game purchases. Another example, and I'll talk about that a bit later, is today's fan tokens. However, we have to be very careful how long is a fan token a utility token, and when does it become something else. I think when most people outside of the audience of this conference talk about, or hear us talking about crypto, they think of currency tokens, so that's very clear. Bitcoin as a prime example. Just as a little fact, I think today we're talking about more than 17,000 coins that are out there, but very clear focused what a cryptocurrency is. But also regulation-wise, it's not that clear again. In Germany, and we heard about that earlier today, since 2020, currency tokens are a financial instrument. Before that, they were not. That regulation, while it's right now clear in Germany, is still very fragmented within Europe. And if you look at the rest of the world, it's a completely different story still. Security tokens. Now, for someone who's traditionally been in the capital markets industry, now this is where it gets interesting, right? Because this is MiFID, and we're going to see elements of that go into MiCA when it actually comes out. And here we're talking about investment contracts, and oftentimes when looking at a token and deciding whether or not it's a security, we can use the Howey test. So whether we have an investment in money into common operations with the intent to generate profits, and this is interesting, which is derived from the work of others. So it's very interesting. But then makes it a security token, and then we have a whole different caveat of limitations and regulations that we need to apply. Asset-backed tokens, on the other hand, are a digital representation of a value which is backed by that same asset. So we're talking about stable coins. Nice example, of course, USDT, which supposedly is 100% backed in US dollar. Still very interesting from a regulatory perspective, and I work for a Big Four. So far, there's no neutral ground proof that it actually is 100% backed, but that's the promise it has, right? So that's, again, what we're talking about. It's interesting from a regulatory perspective. Part of that asset could be loans where the asset actually do not exist anymore. And then big hype of 2022, of course, non-fungible tokens, where we're looking at the digital representation of something like a piece of art. And oftentimes when we talked about this, we used the example of of a famous and very valuable Picasso. Now, interestingly, if you take that and more down-to-earth examples, maybe, or depending on your perspective, Bored Ape Yacht Club, where you create a piece of art and then you tokenize it. As long as you do just that, it's a non-fungible token. If you tokenize the Picasso, then you fractionalize it and give it off to many, many investors who hold a piece of that and potentially want to profit from future income. For example, it's hanging in the Louvre, and every time someone pays an entry ticket to go see it, you get a portion of that. It's not a non-fungible token anymore. It's a security token. So that's where all of that, while at face value, might seem very clear-cut, in actuality, it's not. So looking at some of the major benefits and challenges for tokenization, and that's a full slide. I apologize. I'm going to try to speak only to some of that. And some of that, I think, are very clear, and we've talked about them a lot today. Obviously, fractional ownership, one of the big advantages of tokenization. By taking an asset, creating its digital twin, we can define how many digital pieces of that asset we want to have to be able to pass around. That can be one, it can be a million. All of that is defined in the essence in the contract by which you tokenize it. Liquidity, and we'll look at the downside on the second half of that slide in a second. Tokenization creates the ability to increase liquidity. One example is we take illiquid assets like a very long-term infrastructure investment fund, and we have an example in Italy where we did exactly that, which looks at 10+ year investments into public infrastructure. We take a part of that, we tokenize it, we look at a 1 to 2 year return on investment, and all of a sudden that very solid, very long-term investment vehicle is interesting to PE investors, right? So we take something illiquid and make it liquid. Transparency, in the panel before, just had the prejudice that crypto is used for basically darknet and money laundering. In essence, everything you do on a blockchain is very much more transparent than any transaction you have in fiat money. Efficiency, cost and time, again, sounds very clear. We use modern technology. It's going to be much quicker. It's going to be much more efficient. In reality, that only comes into play when we take the end-to-end process that we look at and we actually put that on the blockchain. We had very early examples of promissory notes, Schuldscheindarlehen, for example, being issued on the blockchain. Well, that was very nice showcases. It's not done mass production yet, and the process end-to-end will only be faster if we get the whole process onto DLT technology. So you have the actual signing of the documents, and you have your notary function, all of that digitalized. Then that becomes much more efficient, but that's where the future is, and we need to see more adoption of the technology end-to-end. Programmability, with the onset of smart contracts, we had a lot more options. So today, you could take, for example, you can do corporate actions, define all of your payment values, all of your annual meeting data. You can put that in a smart contract, and you eliminate the need for cleansing and scrubbing, which today we still have loads of people manually doing labor, calling up local agents and getting that information right. You put it in a smart contract. It's there for everyone to see. And every time you look at it, from whichever country you look at, it's correct. And obviously accessibility and transferability, no matter where you are in the world, you have access to the internet. In theory, you have access to your tokenized assets. On the other hand, hurdles, why are we not seeing much more of it, or what's left out there to do? And obviously, as a consultant, we're not that sad that we have all of these hurdles still out there, because we can help the industry solve them naturally. Regulatory clarity, we heard a lot about that. Still, the examples we gave, just looking at the types of tokens, show that even within one jurisdiction, there's very different handling depending on nuances and usage. We obviously have a very fragmented landscape even within the EU 27. We're hoping that MiCA, while it had a very different focus initially, will bring harmonization into that. And internationally, so outside of Europe, we still have a very fragmented landscape, and we still have entrants coming in, exchanges, for example, that have been active in Asia and very surprised about the landscape they find here, and they have premonitions about things they think they can do, and we have to sadly tell them, no, it doesn't work that easily. Investor protection, cybersecurity, with accessible technology comes the threat of that also being accessible to others. Just getting the 5-minute mark. My clock says something else, but I'll speed up anyway. Anti-money laundering, KYC, we heard a lot about that, and the funds transfer regulation, it still adds on to that. So looking at unhosted wallets, or as they call them, and instilling requirements, I think that's a hurdle not only for tokenized assets, but for the entire DeFi landscape, and we need to get to that. Interoperability and standards, clearly I think we heard a lot. If we look at all of the DeFi protocols, they're on Ethereum, about 85%, and that provides congestion. If we look at tokenized assets and trading them, then we need to overcome those technical barriers. We need to find interoperability between all of the different protocols and standards. And I wouldn't be from a big four if I wouldn't mention accounting and tax handling. Obviously, that's a challenge. How to put cryptos, how to put tokenized assets, how to put the tokenized Bored Ape Yacht Club into your balance sheet. Those are still a lot of interesting questions that we will need to solve, and we will do. And then lastly, with the advantages that tokenization has on liquidity, we're looking at secondary markets where we still have very illiquid markets, and therefore we lack the large-scale adoption of trading volumes on the secondary markets. Real quick example, and maybe to bring a bit of a different color from all of the financial stuff that we talk about all day, look at fan tokens, just as an example of tokenization. And also an example of what happened with COVID. With the onset of COVID, a lot of sports clubs had to face the lack of revenues because there were no more games, there were no more visitors coming to the stadiums, and that actually really sparked the interest in fan tokens. Fan tokens, you can see a lot of different flavors. Offers fans the ability to have a good connection to the club. We saw some examples where you had the ability to actually decide on transfers, or you had a vote in the lineup for today's big play. So all of those are usages where you can use the fan token and to create a bigger connection. On the other hand, where you tie the value of that fan token to the success of your club, in the Premier League, for example, then we're no longer talking about a utility token, and that actually has to be treated as a security token. And obviously, looking at volatility, that's another challenge, but more that fans need to be aware of what happens. And I think when we had the first stock listings of football clubs, fans experienced the same exact thing. They might think their club is great, but if the stock market doesn't agree, your value is not persistent. Last example, and just to show how we're moving into the broader acceptability of tokens. 2017 was the hype of initial coin offerings, and one of my colleagues in a presentation actually referred to it as shitcoins, because it was a means to raise a lot of money quickly, and some of those schemes were not that great. I remember one case of one of the largest ICOs in Germany, and the owners of the company then were off in the Caribbean and even posted pictures in the newspaper, kind of laughing about the investors who just gave them 40 million euros. Along came security token offerings, where all of a sudden companies, where before they tried to avoid BaFin like hell, they said, BaFin, why don't you give, we'll do a prospectus and we'll raise money that way, and now we're much, much securer. Just as an example, tokenization in the field of corporate financing has a large stake already. We reached a security token market cap of $1 billion last year, and that's going to increase 25-fold within the next 3 years. So, in summary, and before I get kicked off the stage, I think there's a lot of work still left out there to do, but as was said earlier today, the asset class is here to stay. And I, for one, am going to be very interested to see what the overarching question for tokenized assets is going to be in next year's conference. And with that, thank you very much for your time.